If you're watching this video, you probably have hundreds, if not thousands of highlights stored in Readwise. That is an excellent place for them if you want to review them with spaced repetition, to chat with them using their AI chat feature, or to generally keep an archive of all of your highlights. But if you're looking to integrate them into your knowledge work, then the Capacities and Readwise integration is a great thing to use. In this video, I'll show you a workflow that shows you how to actually do something with your highlights and how to connect them with the rest of your knowledge work in Capacities. We believe that connecting these highlights offers real value, and that's what we're going to dive into today. Before I start, I just want to say that there is a theme running through this video, and it is intentionality. What you're about to see is not a passive process. It takes time and effort from us to work out what we can do with those highlights to turn them into something useful for us. Therefore, this isn't the shortest video that you'll ever watch about your highlights and note-taking, but I do want to take the time to dive into the various things that you can do. There will be several different things shown in this video, different activities that you can do, and I want you to think of it like a menu. You absolutely should not do all of these things with everything that you ever read. It's a range of choices, and you can pick up and put down what you need or do not need at a given time. In reality, the way that you process articles and books and podcasts, etc., they will differ depending on how long they are and, of course, the themes that come up and how much time you have. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. This is just a menu of approaches that you can choose to use that generally takes us in that direction that I've mentioned so far, from raw highlights into some connected notes in Capacities. The skill underneath all of it, though, is engaging with your notes with intention. So let me show you how that process can begin. To start things off, we are going to do an initial process of the highlights. So this is what my article has mapped into in Capacities, following the setup that I chose. If you want to see how to do this, then look at the previous video because I go into it in detail there. But I've said that I want any article from Readwise to map onto our web link object type, so that's what I'm seeing here. I have everything I need up here, so cover image, link back to the original, link back to the highlights in Readwise, and of course all of my highlights. This is the format that they come in by default, and you can see that if I hover over each highlight, I get the 6 dots on the left hand side, which tells us that each highlight is a block in Capacities. The blocks have the normal actions that you're able to do, and we also have some extras such as adding a note, turning into object, and a bit more, but we'll come back to that shortly. So the first thing that I'm going to do is rearrange my highlights into like groups to show the themes that I mentioned. So I'm seeing here that there are several comments about complexity, so I'm just going to add a heading and put all of the complexity related ones together. And then similarly, it looks like beneath that it's all about systems thinking. So I'll create a heading for that as well. And this one is about mapping systems. And then I have this one about decisions, which doesn't quite fit up there so far. And I had these two, which I don't think fit for what I'm getting out of this article personally. So I'm actually just going to delete them. So I've selected those with Command, Shift and click. And I'm going to delete them. Rearranging highlights is one thing that you can do, but so is deleting. All of your highlights remain in Readwise. This is not a two-way sync where things that I do in Capacities tell Readwise to delete highlights. Essentially what the integration lets you do is look at all of your highlights in this new context in Capacities amongst the rest of your notes and say what subsection of these highlights is useful to me now. And from this brief review, I've decided that one's related to complexity, systems thinking, and mapping systems on the highlights that I want to work with more, so I can get rid of everything else. If at a later point I decide I need them, I can just click on this link and it takes me to my original highlights, and I can just find what I'm missing and copy it into Capacities. Do not be afraid to delete things. It can be very helpful if done with intention. You might also find when you're doing this initial review that you want to edit some highlights. Sometimes, especially with books, a highlight that you begin on one page is cut off from a highlight on the next page. And if you need to combine something in Capacities, you can just put your cursor at the start of a block and backspace until it goes into the highlight above. I don't need to do it with this one, I just wanted to show that that is an option. These ones are all fine, but further down in the systems thinking one, we can see this highlight kind of opens up a selection of points, I suppose. So what I'm going to do is actually use tab to indent the highlights that are part of this section. That's all of these. And now they are essentially grouped with that core highlight, which helps me when I'm reviewing it to consider them as a group rather than just individual highlights. You can see down here I have a couple of notes attached to a highlight. I did this when I was reading in Readwise Reader, but you can add a note as you are reviewing them just with this button. So you can write anything here. And for me, when I'm reading and I'm adding notes, it's essentially a reminder to the version of me that's reviewing my highlights. So here I wondered if this was referring to models, which is a concept I've only just started learning about. So what I'm going to do here is select that block by clicking on the 6 dots and ask the AI assistant. So I've asked my question and it's answering. What I'm going to do here, because in this phase I'm thinking about my initial process of the highlights as a whole rather than diving into something specifically, I'm just going to append this answer, and if I press tab, then that is again technically grouped with that highlight, but because it's quite long I can shorten it a little bit by using a toggle, and if I close that, then I just see the highlight for now and I can open it and have a look at my notes there whenever I'm ready. You'll have seen as well that this button also has color coding. So if you either already have a color coding system with your highlights or you want to create one, you can use this to enforce that. And if you didn't want this yellow formatting or the link back to your original highlight, you can just clear the highlight and that will remove that formatting. There's also another button here turning into objects, but I'll show you that a bit later on. So what you can see from the actions I've taken so far is that this initial process is really just tidying up. Again, there's no set rules to follow here because the concept of what tidied up highlights means will differ for each of us. So any of the activities that I've shown so far are things that you could choose to use for your review process. The way I'd summarize it so far is I've taken those original highlights and I've interrupted them a little bit. And even just as it stands now, if I navigated away from this note and left it and came back another day, I would immediately see that it is discussing complexity, systems thinking, and it's starting to talk about mapping systems. But if it's talking about those things, and if I've picked them up because I'm interested in them, then I really want to connect what I'm learning about these things from this article to other related notes in my system. But right now, this note is isolated. I can show you that with our graph view. As we can see, the only thing it's connected to right now is the cover image. I know I have other content in my space about systems, so I'm missing some connections here, and that leads us into the next step, which is looking at your highlights and asking yourself what they remind you of, and then you link to those things. So let's discuss that next. So let's start this with a kind of zoomed out approach based on what I've just said. So if I left this and then came back another day, I would immediately see, thanks to my rearranging and to the headers, that there are 3 distinct sections here. So I could tag this whole article with those sections. So for example, I know I have a systems tag. I don't think I have a complexity tag. No, so I could create one. I won't, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And I wouldn't have a tag for something as specific as mapping systems. So I've added that systems tag. And I can also use the AI tags to see if there's any other tags that could be related to this that I've forgotten about. The AI has gone through my list of tags and decided there's nothing appropriate here. So even with that one tag, as you can see, I have contextualized this piece a little bit more. I can see I have several other things about systems, and that suggests it's a worthwhile exercise to look at this in more depth because it's something I've got other content about as well. So that's the zoomed out view, just looking at the object, but let's think more specifically. I don't have a tag about complexity as we just saw, but I actually don't know much about it. But these 4 highlights are offering a really valuable insight into complexity. So because I lack a definition for complexity, I'm going to create one. And the way I'm going to do that is by highlighting this title and clicking the plus. You can obviously create any object type that you have, but for me, I want to create a definition because that's what I feel I'm lacking. Now, if I do this and I open up that complexity definition, I have a link telling me that I have mentioned complexity in this web link. But there is one very simple thing that I can do to make that backlink even more useful, and that is to select the highlights that discuss it and press tab. When I do that and I click on that definition again, you can see that not only do I see that this article mentioned complexity, it tells me what was mentioned. And that's very helpful for me when working out what my definition of complexity should be. We'll come back to that in a moment. We'll continue. Systems thinking I know a little bit more about, and obviously there are many more highlights about systems thinking than with complexity. So I don't want to take the same approach of linking or creating a definition here and indenting everything else. I want to look at my highlights now with a more critical eye, and in doing so I realise that this highlight is actually a really nice definition. So I'm just going to search to see if I already have a systems thinking definition. I do not, so I will create one. And when I do that and click on the systems thinking definition, that specific block shows up, and that's going to be helpful for me in the next step. And then I want to review all of this. So I can obviously see I've got this great image about looking under the surface, and I think this highlight really speaks to that. So I'm actually just going to drag it and drop it into that image. If I open that on the right hand side and go to that notes tab, you can see I've now moved that highlight and it tells me where it's come from. While I'm here, I will also rename the image just so it's easier to find in the future. This highlight I feel has been mentioned there, so I'm going to delete it, and I think I'll delete this mapping system section as well. Again, don't be afraid to delete things. The more time you spend with your notes, the more you'll realise what's useful and what isn't. Again, all highlights are in Readwise, so just think about what you need in Capacities. Now for this highlight, I obviously have some information and I have the actual image. And what I want to do is make sure that I see this image when I'm looking at my systems thinking definition. So I look at this image and I think it reminds me of systems thinking, and all I have to do to associate it with systems thinking is link to it. When I click on that definition, I now have the original highlight that I linked to, and I have the image. Now again, with my more critical eye, I'm realizing that this is further explaining this point at the top. So I'm just going to move it up. This one as well. So I've moved those closer together, and I will link these specifically. And same again here. So at this point, I've done a lot of linking to relevant and interesting concepts, definitions, images, etc. And whatever you're linking to is a signal of what's important or what's interesting to you from this article. And it's quite common, at least in my practices, that it will prompt me to go down a rabbit hole about a similar thing. And I just want to show that if you have read something else about these topics and you want to dive into it right away, you should absolutely do that. And one way that you can do that with our integration is to import from Readwise from our command palette. So it looks at all of the things that have highlights, and you can just click enter to import that into your space and get reading something else. So I'll show you a couple more actions that you can do with your highlights before we move on to the next step. So I'm in another web link now, synced from Readwise, and just to demonstrate, there was this point here which I thought was really important, and for me it stuck in my head. So what I want to do is turn this whole highlight into an object using that button I have as yet not demonstrated. So you just click on that icon, turn into object, and choose which type you'd like to create. My quotes are set to embed automatically as small cards, which is why it's changed the view. But if I open it, you can see that that highlight is still synced to Readwise, and the title looks a bit different because it has synced to Readwise. And when you make something an object, you are essentially promoting it. You're saying, not only do I want to find this highlight when I'm reviewing this article again in the future, you want to see it elsewhere. Because of course, when you create an object, it joins all other objects of that type. So I can review all of my quotes, but objects can also be tagged. So I've asked AI to apply some tags there. I can also write and link to anything because, again, I now want to see this quote in multiple places. I've added that tag not only to that quote, but also to web links and to other things that I've read. And now I get to see this quote amongst similar things. So again, tagging and linking is important. And if there's something that you really want to remember or come back to easily in what you are reading, then you can create an object to do that. And in general, you don't have to apply tags just to objects. So up here in this section, but you can also apply them to individual blocks as well. So this point here about connections always makes me think of networks, so I can apply that tag. And again, you can always use the AI tagging as well to see if you've missed any tags. Always decide after if you want to keep them or not. It's just there to help you rather than to replace your own brain and your own time spent thinking about the notes and highlights that you've got. Now, there is a reason I came into this second article to show you this, and it's just to reinforce that point I mentioned earlier, that not all activities that you can do with your highlights need to be applied to every article. Don't treat this like a very set procedure to follow. As long as you're spending time with your notes and you're thinking about them, you'll be fine. So, to summarise what we've done in the video so far, we've looked at the highlights, we've rearranged them, we've thought about them more deeply, and we've linked to things that they talk about or teach us about. But that isn't the end of the road in the general journey from raw highlights that you've read into connected knowledge and capacities. There's another dimension, and that is to really think about what these highlights have taught you about what you have linked to. So in other words, what do these 4 highlights specifically teach me about complexity? To work out what these highlights have taught me about complexity, and crucially taught me about how to define complexity, I'm just going to summarise what I've read here. So as described, I went through my backlinks and made a bit of a summary. A couple of times I copied a block reference. So when you specifically want to reference exactly this block, you can copy the block reference like this. That gives you a link. And when I click on it, it takes me not only to the original object, but to precisely the block I am linking to. And I did that again down here when I realised that there's a little research project in here that I'd like to do. So I simply created a task for that and sent it to my task manager. And this is my definition just based on this backlink. But there are more than just backlinks in capacities. That's where I've actively linked to this object. But we also have mentions, and that is any block in capacities where the name of this object, complexity, has been mentioned, but I haven't linked to it. Now, because these top 2 were nested under that heading, it's part of what I just reviewed in my backlinks, but everything else is links I've missed. So you can either just review them and add them to your definition, or you can link to them, because when you link a mention, it essentially promotes it and moves it out of that mention section and into the backlinks. Up to you what approach you take. But I want to continue to think about what these mentions can teach me in the same way I thought about what the backlinks can teach me. So I will review my mentions and update my definition. Okay, so I've done that, and I put 2 things in bold to remind me to talk about them. So what I learned from my mentions is that systems thinking helps us handle complexity, but we're not trying to solve for it. And I'm going to link to systems thinking here. And there is a shift in the fact that I'm not linking a highlight, I am linking a definition. So I am linking the definition of systems thinking to the definition of complexity. And that's more precise, because what I realized when going through these mentions is that the highlights were specifically teaching me about systems thinking, and systems thinking relates to complexity, not that specific highlight. So what I'm doing now is thinking, okay, upon my review, I realised that these highlights were teaching me about something else. So let's open up a note for that something else and do the same process where I read what is mentioned in these highlights and I use that to create a definition for systems thinking, which it is discussing. I've done a brief summary here, but I'm always rearranging and I'm always thinking about how I can make this clearer to myself. So even based on what I've just written, I think this section would help down there, and I should combine those blocks. And I can also link to the fact that it was this specific highlight that taught me that we can't solve complexity, but systems thinking can help. And I can just highlight that and paste onto there so that when I click on that, I get taken back to that original block. So this step where we're thinking about what our highlights teach us about what we have linked to is a bit messy. It involves a lot of thinking, it involves some experimenting, it involves writing and rewriting. And that is why I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this isn't a passive process, it takes time and it needs intentionality. But the payoff is great, because now I can see very clearly that complexity and systems thinking are linked together, and crucially, my notes know that they are linked together. And I can see that with the graph view. So already we have gone from a list of highlights to reorganized highlights, to linked highlights, and now to connected notes. Essentially, this is a never-ending process. This is just one article. The more I read, the more I link, the more backlinks and mentions I will create. So there is always going to be this option to read and review your backlinks and mentions, to think about what they have collectively taught you about one of your objects. We've been focusing on definitions in this video, but the exact same thing works with any other object type. It's the point of linking. It gives us a new context in which to think about something. So we're taking a highlight out of its original context, which is one part of an article, and we're saying this is useful for your thinking on complexity. And you linking to that and reviewing the backlinks is how you work out how it's useful and how you ultimately create your notes. So perhaps when I'm reviewing this more fully and I link to systems thinking in here as well, I would then open my systems thinking definition and repeat the process of reviewing my backlinks. So when you're watching this video, please don't think that you have to do all of this process with everything you read every single day. It might be that you want to dive into your definition of systems thinking because it's a rabbit hole that you're currently diving down. But it's okay that if between reading, highlighting and linking, there is some time between reviewing your backlinks to find what it's taught you. Again, this video is about a general workflow taking you from raw highlights into connected knowledge. It is not a checklist of activities to do with every single note. That's a really hard standard to create for yourself and ultimately isn't sustainable. What is sustainable is an approach of intentionality. Taking your time and understanding that it's okay to do that will give you more out of your knowledge work than stressful deadlines that don't really come from a place of meaning. But remember, if you take that intentional approach and you're okay with taking your time over your notes and you're carefully linking, then you're doing what you need to create this environment where one day, if you want to dive in to a different definition, you can do that, because you know that when you scroll past the note, you're going to find backlinks and mentions that can help you because you've been spending time with your highlights when they've come from Readwise. So I'm going to end the video here. It's been a long one, I know. If you have any questions about this workflow or want to know anything more, then please let me know in the comments below.